It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Are you the go-to sports guru around the water cooler? In just 22 minutes a day, Locked On Sports Today will bring you up to speed with the biggest stories, breaking news, and recaps of last night's action across the sports world with Locked On's local experts. It's the daily sports podcast to make you the sports conversation starter at the water cooler. Stay in the know every day with Locked On Sports Today. Available on Odyssey, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and much love to everyone tuning in across the globe during this holiday season to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Friday edition. Much love for being here, everybody. We're continuing our divisional breakdown of the big-time fantasy beasts and busts in every division. It's time for the Central. It's time for a look at all of the happenings so far in that division. You know we got big-time bets before we head into this break. Thank you for joining us. Let's get this Christmas money.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to your source for fantasy hockey news. It is the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. As always, I am joined by my esteemed co-host, Mr. Steele Roden, and of course, it is your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. This is the season for reflecting and being appreciative, and trust me when I say, Steele and I, we see you and appreciate you across all platforms. You listen and take in this podcast. We would be nowhere without the support of everyone out there. So a sincere thank you. We are coming up on almost 1 year of doing this show. Steele, I'm feeling thankful. I'm feeling jolly. But I also want to give back to our listeners. I want to break down this Central Division because when I look at all four, this is maybe the sleepy division, but it shouldn't be. And we'll explain why. We got big-time bets. This is a loaded Friday board before we get to the holiday season, Steele. The NHL is going to take its pause for a few days, but we need to bank a little bit of cash for this holiday season, so we're going to get to the big-time bets. We discussed the Pacific Division on the last episode. We're going to get to the Eastern Conference next week, but let's talk about the Central Division, and I think we can get through the 8th, 7th, and 6th spots pretty quickly. But there are a few interesting points to talk about. Hit me with what you're seeing in the Central Division, and we'll start with the Chicago Blackhawks, and there might not be a whole lot of things to say here.
Yeah, well, it is a sleepy division for the bottom three teams, but once you get into the top four, it gets real serious and competitive going into the next half of the season once we get into the new year. But yeah, the Chicago Blackhawks, this is exactly where I think everyone predicted them to be at this point in the season and probably finishing at the end of the regular season as well. 7-20-4 record for 18 points in 31 games is just not good enough. My preseason prediction, I had them finishing 8th in the Central Division, finishing with 59 points. I think that's exactly where they're going to finish with the amount of points, maybe even a little less. But, you know, there's only two players that were even draftable or even ownable at this point for the Chicago Blackhawks. That's Patrick Kane and Seth Jones, obviously. But even then, they're not doing that much to really be a productive asset to your fantasy team when you look at maybe of where you might have drafted them during draft season. But, yeah, everyone else on the Chicago Blackhawks is 20% owned or less. So that just gives you, like we talked about Max Domi maybe being a potential guy that you can add. Definitely a guy you can add for the occasional game when you need someone, same as Jonathan Taves or Taylor Radish. But other than that, you're looking at those two guys who are not even producing at good levels.
I actually look at the Chicago Blackhawks as a bit of a mine for the dynasty side of things where you can go digging in the barrel. Taylor Radish, thank you for mentioning him. Jonathan Taves has been better. Does he make it a very valuable fantasy name? No, but he has been better. Deeper formats, that's where you look at the Chicago Blackhawks. Last in the league in goals per game. 29th in the league and goals against per game. That's going to leave you losing a whole ton of games. look, this team is in a rebuild. We're not going to talk too much about, there are some deep fantasy pieces there. My top fantasy piece, obviously, this season, it has to be Kane. My biggest disappointment, Peter Mrazek. I know we didn't think he'd be much, but he is just straight up awful this season. And, we are going to throw out a few odds to win this division, and I'm not going to throw out another odd until I get to the 5th spot, but this is just hilarious. Plus 200,000 for the Chicago Blackhawks to win the division. I just had to say it, 18 points, and that's what's going on, Steele. The Arizona Coyotes, though, if you don't mind, I have a little bit of a take here with this team. Before, I know you've watched this team, and you've got an eye on some of these players too. But look, Velmelka, Gostisbehere, Moser, even guys like Lawson Krause and now Chychrun and Smoltz coming back from injury, there's some positive things happening with this team. And actually, I haven't even mentioned Clayton Keller yet, who I know you're high on. When I look at fantasy beasts and busts, the beast is Clayton Keller. I can't even look at any busts on this team so far because they are really performing right where I think a lot of people would think they would, or even a bit better. So, maybe the disappointment, I had this written down, Mullet Arena, this situation where they're playing in the same stadium as an NCAA team rattles me to the core. To me, that's the biggest disappointment, is they haven't been able to figure that out. That doesn't mean anything for fantasy, but guys like Moser, Gostisbehere, Velmelka, they have been valuable. And, hats off to the Arizona Coyotes, because that's not an interesting or appealing situation if you're a hockey player playing in that building.
Yeah, it might not be, but the atmosphere does seem a little bit electric there with all those college students. I don't know if you saw that story the other day. But apparently someone lost a finger in one of those brawls in the crowd. So it's getting a little nasty in the stands at Mullet Arena.
Well, there you go.
Look, I'm on the same page with you with the Arizona Coyotes. I have been impressed with what I've seen from them. Obviously, still not a good team compared to the top tier teams in the NHL. But I like what they've done so far this season. I like a lot of their players. I really like Velmelka. I'm high on Clayton Keller, but you're right. For me, the fact that their highest owned players are the two defensemen in Gostisbehere and Chychrun, over 80+% owned on ESPN and Yahoo leagues. It's absolutely incredible. And the fact that Chychrun, coming back from the injury, he's got 3 goals, 13 points in 15 games. I think, right there beside Clayton Keller, Gostisbehere and Chychrun have been the best players as well. And then for me, my actual disappointment is Barrett Hayton. I think there was a lot of expectations when the Arizona Coyotes drafted him. We saw him at the World Juniors as well for Canada. He looked really good then, but he hasn't really taken the most out of that opportunity with the Coyotes. I know he's been up and down the lineup, but even when he's up in the lineup in the top 6, hasn't made much of that opportunity. So for me, been the most disappointing for the Coyotes.
And a quick shout out to Mateus Maselli, one of the top offensive rookies in the game. He doesn't fill out the peripheral categories, but offensively, he's starting to look very, very comfortable. And all of a sudden, if the Arizona Coyotes can piece together a couple of decent offseason moves, hey, I'm not ready to count this team out over the next couple of seasons.
Well, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing for the Arizona Coyotes is trying to figure out a way to entice those free agents to come and sign for Arizona. No one wants to play with them when they're playing in an arena for 5,000 seats. And, it's just not a good look.
It's not a good look. They're going to have to get Oakland Athletics I feel, with some of these bargain bin kind of players in the MLB. You see the Oakland Athletics just having to kind of scrap together teams. I could see the Arizona Coyotes being a scrappy team, but now we get real interesting, Steele, because 6th place, Nashville Predators, 32 points. This is a team that notoriously starts slow and goes on a heavy second half push, and then maybe even goes on a mini heater in the playoffs. Plus 4,500 to win the division, too bold. I'm not going to go out there and say sprinkle on them, but they're going to be around at the bubble. They're going to be around as one of those wild card teams, in my opinion. And the biggest fantasy piece so far, and I looked at the stats, but I know Roman Josi came out and went off last season. But he is their most important fantasy asset, in my opinion. I know Matt Duchene's there. We got Philip Forsbergs and Johanssons of the world as well. He is the biggest fantasy piece, in my opinion, so far this season. He's right there at the top of the team in scoring. And the biggest disappointment, before I get to what I've seen from this team, and I'll hit you with that very quickly, Tanner Jeannot is disappointed this season.
Yeah.
3 goals, 3 assists. You and I, maybe we got a little too high on him too quick, but that's my disappointment, and I'll hit you with this. The lack of offense is hurting this team, and it's not because of Roman Josi. It's the rest of that forward group. Mikhail Granlund and otherwise need to do better. 29th in goals per game this season, Steele at 2.52, and also 29th on the power play. They need to be better. They're pretty good defensively. They're a notoriously slow starter, and I think they'll be right there on the bubble if they can get some more offense.
Well, that's the thing I have written first in my notes here is that the offense has been the problem. Scoring goals, and it's simple as that. Scoring goals is the problem. And, I think at this point, you and everyone else knows that I was very disappointed with the New York Rangers, but I liked and I'm impressed with what they've been able to do, switch things around the last 2 weeks. By far, the Nashville Predators have been the most disappointing team for me. I had my bold prediction of them being a top 3 team in the NHL at the end of the season. Not going to happen. And again, it all comes down to the offense. They're not doing a good enough job. They only have one player who has scored in the double digits this year, and it's their newly acquired addition in Nino Niederreiter. He's the only one who has 11 goals this season. Philip Forsberg, Matt Duchene, they might have 25 points, but they only have 9 or 8 goals on the season, so it's not good enough. And again, we're just going to beat down the offense right now. They are the second worst team in the league for goals for, with 80 in the NHL right now. Only Chicago is worse than them for goals for. They have 70, which is just brutal. But look, their goals against isn't even that bad. They're in the middle to even top 15, 12 goals against with 95 on the season. Their defense isn't the problem. It's their offense right now. That's why they're so disappointing.
That is disappointing. That's all kinds of disappointing. And the more that we talk about it, the more that I start to think their margin for getting there on that wild card cusp, Steele, one of those bubble teams, is going to shrink real quickly. But we're not going to shrink our attention from safety on the roads this holiday season. Today, we are talking about impaired driving, people. Did you know that driving high is also considered under the influence? That's right. You can drive under the influence of marijuana, and that's against the law in every state where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI depending on where you are. You can call friends. Your coworkers can tell. Your parents can tell if you're too high. Everyone can tell. What makes the difference is that law enforcement, they know when you're driving high. Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you are not, because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. Driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high and you still get a DUI. Please be careful on the roads this holiday season, people, for yourself, for others, your family, and anyone else on the road. Today's episode is brought to you and paid for by the NHTSA. Please be safe on there.
Are you the go-to sports guru around the water cooler? Do you want to be? In just 22 minutes a day, Locked On Sports Today will bring you up to speed with the biggest stories, breaking news, and recaps of last night's action across the sports world with Locked On's local experts. It's the daily sports podcast to make you the sports conversation starter at the water cooler. Stay in the know every day with Locked On Sports Today. Available on Odyssey, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts.
Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app and your favorite podcast platforms. And of course, stay safe out there this holiday season. Let's continue on the topic of this Central Division, breaking down each team and what has gone on so far. Up to date in the season. Next on the list, it's the St. Louis Blues. 16-1 for 33 points in 33 games this season and flip. For me, this team has been on the biggest roller coaster the last 2 months of any other team. I know we've talked about a couple of disappointing teams so far, but the Blues have been on a roller coaster. I'm going to go down their season so far.
Please.
They started the year 3-0. Great start to the season. Their next 8 games, they lost those 8 games in a row. After that, they went and won their next 7 games. And then after those wins, they went 1-6 in their next 7 games. for a 16-1 record up to this point in the season. So it's been an up and down roller coaster season. You have all the shenanigans that Jordan Binnington has done so far, bodying players coming behind the net and him barking at the bench, which you and I have talked about at length as well. It's been a roller coaster of a season, but with that being, obviously what has happened for them, the upside has been Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas. Those two guys, the two young guys, massive deals in the offseason. Took a little bit of time for them to get up to this point and actually start producing, but once they got going, wow, did they take off, and they're a huge part of the Blues even being 500% win record right now.
Biggest fantasy beast for me on this team, Jordan Kyrou, and coming on like a house of fire, 10 points over his last 4 games, and that includes 6 goals. Robert Thomas, also a big piece of them hanging in there. You mentioned it. I think there's a lot more to come from both Thomas and Kyrou, who are both now just hitting their stride in mid to late December, however you want to take it. This has been a disappointing team for me, Steele. You mentioned, one of your biggest disappointments. This might be my biggest disappointment after what I saw from the Blues last season. And Jordan Binnington is the reason for that inconsistency. It comes from his on ice. It comes from the off ice, his attitude. Look, when you have a guy like Craig Berube calling you out in the media, this is a player who doesn't, or this is a coach who doesn't want to do that. I can guarantee you he's old school. You don't call out goaltenders like that unless you absolutely have to. When he's doing what he's been doing, and you mentioned it, he needs to smarten up, because I think the team is decent enough around him to at least knock on the door in the playoffs, especially if he can figure it out. Look, the goaltending has been the issue. They are allowing the 26th most goals against per game at 3.61. That's way too high, Steele. And here's the other thing. They can't kill penalties, 27th worst in the league. And O'Reilly, Tarasenko. These are some of these players that might be on the move for the deadline. There's a lot in flux for this St. Louis Blues team, Steele, so it's hard to really peg. But if you don't mind, shall we move on to the reigning Stanley Cup champions? Because there's some interesting things going on here in Colorado as well.
Well, I'm definitely excited to hear what you have to say about the Avalanche now, because I didn't have much to say about them. Look, we all know about the amount of injuries to their top players they've dealt with.
You're right.
They're still finding ways to win games. So I don't have a problem with a lot of the things like I have written down on my list. They are 7th worst in the league goals for. They only have 93 goals, so the offense hasn't been there, but that comes into play with the injuries they've dealt with to all of their top forwards. Landeskog, Nichushkin, McKinnon, Lehkonen was out. Rodriguez was out a couple of weeks as well. So they've had a ton of injuries to deal with, but they're also the 4th best team in the league for goals against with 82. So they're not scoring a lot of goals, but they're shutting down the opposition at the same time. So I'm totally fine with them not being able to produce offensively right now, if they're getting the defense, down. And just looking at their last 3 games, 2-1 win in overtime, 1-0 shootout win, 3-1 win as well. So they're not scoring a ton of goals, but they're still finding ways to win the games.
2 words there, Alexander Georgiev. Hats off to whoever went out and got him more at the top end of their drafts this season, because that's paying off. Look, my biggest fantasy beast, and he's carried the team aside from Georgiev, it's obvious. Mikko Rantanen has been an all-star this season. He is a beast, and now all of a sudden a guy who had to dish the puck because of the players on his line who like to shoot more, in McKinnon and others, he's also been able to get it done scoring goals. He has been key. You take away Rantanen and Georgiev, I don't know where this team is, and I need to talk about these odds very quickly, Steele, for literally 10 seconds. Plus 200 to win the division, that's better odds than the other 2 teams on top of them. Vegas isn't counting out this club just yet. If they can get healthy, they will be just as good as any other team in the Western Conference. And if Georgiev can continue to do this, I'll be sprinkling on this team for another run to the Cup. Yeah, I said it. Speaking of runs to the Cup, what do you think about what's going on in this Minnesota Wild situation, Steele? Plus 400 to win the division. I want you to take it away here, because I want to break down my biggest disappointment, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this.
I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this. Look, this is what I've been waiting for on this episode of the podcast. My Minnesota Wild might be a little biased, but there's a lot of stuff that backs up what I'm about to say. Minnesota at this point, 19, 11, and 2 record for 40 points in 32 games.
Yep.
Obviously started off the season very, very weak. Lost their first 3 games in ugly fashion.
That's clear.
You go down the list at the goal differential at this point. They're up 14 goals. You take away those first 3 games, it's even higher at this point. So ugly first 3 games to start the season. But for me, I really like what I've seen up and down the lineup from the Minnesota Wild. 4 players on their team over 25 points, obviously led by Kirill Kaprizov, who's been the beast of the team, still getting everything done. They have a young rookie on the blue line in Kalen Addison. You and I have talked about him. He's looked great quarterbacking that power play.
Power play specialist.
He's getting more and more opportunities with them, and he's making the most of it. So I love to see that. They have a bunch of depth players that bring a ton of value in every single aspect you could think of. Ryan Reeves was a great addition. Marcus Foligno does the exact same stuff with a little more offensive upside. Like I mentioned, Connor Dewar, Shaw at the fourth line are great as well. Look, they're able to mix and match their lineups, and they get the ball rolling every single time. And for me, another beast of them is an underrated tandem in the crease with Fleury and Gustafson. Gustafson has been great as a backup this season.
He has, and to me, Steele, is after what we saw from the inconsistencies from Marc-Andre Fleury, who up until this season in his career, aside from dealing with some injuries, has been nothing short of a bona fide Hall of Famer. So to me, it comes down to the goaltending. Can it take them over the top? That's what, for me, separates this team from good to legitimate cup contender, because balanced, gritty, size, now they have a superstar. That's what they've been lacking for the last number of seasons. Kirill Kaprizov is that player. But right here, I got to show you some love, because this episode is going to be long. That's okay. We're getting to big-time bets. We're going to get to the top 2 teams in the division after the break. But how about this? They are the second most disciplined team in the NHL. They take the second least penalties out of everyone, and they are the 10th best power play in the league. So when you take the second least penalties and you can capitalize on the power play, that's when you win games in the postseason. So I think this team is built for a run, Steele. I like where your head's at with this.
Yeah, and, talk about that power play. I love how creative they are, too. Zuccarello and Kaprizov below the red line behind the net, passing back and forth, looking for a quick wraparound, which I've seen Kaprizov pull off a couple times this year. Just to add on to the Minnesota Wild, like you said, you're talking about odds.
Oh, here we go.
Plus 400 to win the division. I'm sprinkling some money on them
Why
to
not?
win the division.
Why not?
I think Colorado, they creep their way up into the top 3. I think Wild creep up to the top spot at the end of the year. And also just adding on to that, it looks like the consensus for the team, it looks like Matt Dumba's on his way out before the trade deadline. It looks like he's going to be traded out. So I'm really excited to see what kind of acquisitions or whatever they get in return for Matt Dumba's quality as well. But I'm definitely sprinkling some money on the Wild to win the division at plus 400.
Why not? And that's the caveat that you have to also understand with a number of these teams that are going to be in the mix. They're going to be moving or acquiring pieces. That's why I honestly see the St. Louis Blues go a little bit 50-50 over the next couple of weeks. They're going to be sellers. They're going to be selling off Ryan O'Reilly and others. So that's why I'm not ready to even put any stock in any of those teams behind Colorado. Steele, take us to the break, because the top 2 teams in this division so far do warrant the most attention. And I got one more triple dip before we end the year.
I'm excited to get to big-time bets. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Don't forget, hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. We are free on every single podcast platform, including YouTube. Show us some love. We appreciate all the love and support. Thank you so much. Let's get to the second place team in this Central Division, the Winnipeg Jets. 21-10-1 record for 43 points in 32 games this season. And for me, the storyline above anything else has been Josh Morrissey. Josh Morrissey has been the key part of this Winnipeg Jets taking off this season, with him just having an unreal season up to date. 6 goals, 38 points, plus 16. He's already beat his career high from last year, which was 37 points. He by far is the beast of the Winnipeg Jets.
Interesting, because I would also take a look at the Vezina candidate in their blue paint named Connor Hellebuck.
That is true. That is very true.
Posting a 2.33 and a 928 save percentage. I wouldn't go as far to say as Morrissey is by and large the number one beast, but he's right there with Connor Hellebuck. And they have a few, Steele, because no one's talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois with 37 points, 1 point behind the team lead. Kyle Connor not getting enough respect. Mark Scheifele, a good start to the season with 19 goals. A lot to like about this Winnipeg Jets team, and if you listen to the rumblings around the NHL, this might be a team buying pieces ahead of the deadline. Look, you have Connor Hellebuck, Vezina-like. You've got pieces like Morrissey, Dubois, Connor, and Ehlers hasn't even been in the mix. I need to give this Winnipeg Jets team its credit because you and I couldn't put our finger on this team, almost as much so as the team ahead of them. These were two teams we did not know what they were going to do. Shout out to Rick Bowness behind the Winnipeg Jets bench for bringing a steadying presence. This man's been behind a bench in the NHL for almost 4 decades. That's impressive right there. Neil Pionk has been my biggest disappointment.
I was just about to say that.
Thank you, because I thought he was going to be a lot better offensively. And very quickly, before I turn it over to you for your Jets take, they have been beast mode on special teams. 5th best penalty kill and the 11th best power play. That's how they've been getting it done in addition to Connor Hellebuck and others. Hats off to the Winnipeg Jets and crew.
Yeah, it's been phenomenal to see what Pierre-Luc Dubois looks like. He's actually enjoying hockey once again with the production he's done. Hellebuck right up there with Josh Morrissey for the top of the team, what they've been able to do. I'm right there with you, though. Neil Pionk has been the bust so far this season. I thought what Josh Morrissey is doing right now, I thought Pionk would have been capable of doing, maybe not to this extent, but nonetheless close to that, what Morrissey has done. For me, underrated, though, Adam Lowry, 19 points on the season, plus 7, 53 shots, 65 hits, 17 blocks, chips in on the third line, does everything, and he's only owned at 5% right now. So definitely a guy, if you need some depth, Adam Lowry of the Winnipeg Jets is producing really, really good right now. But the top team, the Dallas Stars, the Central Division, on the line for them. This is the team that I think slowly falls down the standings. I still think they're a great team. I still think they're a legitimate playoff threat. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to see Colorado work their way up to the top 3, either second or third. Winnipeg's going to remain there as well because Connor Hellebuck and what they've been able to do. I know Jake Ottinger is great, but I see Winnipeg staying in the top 3 more than the Dallas Stars. And like I said, I have the Minnesota Wild winning this division. So at the end of the day, the Dallas Stars are still a legitimate threat, but the top 4 teams in this division are scary good. Scary good. And I think the Dallas Stars find themselves in the first wildcard spot again.
Look, I also completely forgot while you're talking about the Minnesota Wild, my disappointment for the Wild was Marco Rossi. He's been nowhere. A lot of people have expected him to do something. I just needed to throw that out there because you're so high on these Minnesota Wild. Look, the Dallas Stars, 44 points, 1 point ahead of the Winnipeg Jets. Everything you just said right there, I'm on par with, because I think this Dallas Stars team has been overachieving. 5th in goals per game they are 5th in goals per game right now. No one could have predicted that this offense was going to be able to get it done at the clip that they are getting it done. But seriously, Jason Robertson as the fantasy beast on this team does deserve a lot of credit. And I think I came on to this show in the offseason and said Joe Pavelski and that line has topped out at their production, and they're continuing to get it done. So I need to eat a little bit of crow on that one because the team is good, Steele. Jake Ottinger is good, but I'm with you. Let's see how this shakes out. And I can't help it when I look at these 4 teams, Colorado, Minnesota, Winnipeg, and Dallas. Other than Minnesota, I think this Winnipeg Jets team is a force to be reckoned with.
Yes.
If Connor Hellebuck can continue to do his thing, that top 6 forward group is as good as any in the NHL. And power play, penalty kill, I'm high on that. Anyway, I love breaking down these divisions, my friend. We're going to break down the Eastern Conference, Metro. We're going to get to the Atlantic. We're going to get to big-time bets as well. Take us away.
Well, I just want to finish up with something on the Dallas Stars, though.
Please do.
I'm right there again. They definitely overexceeded expectations already at the beginning of the season. Like I said, they're slowly going to come back down to earth, and we're going to see the brunt of the offense put heavily on that top line of Robertson, Pavelski, and Hintz. And, again, coming back down to earth, we're going to see a regression in Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, Mason Marchment, all of those guys who have had pretty decent starts to the season so far. They're going to slow down a bit. So, again, a legitimate threat. Nonetheless, those other three teams that we mentioned are a little bit more of a threat in that Central Division. But let's get over to big time bets where the money is made. Let's hit you with the top 3 picks for Friday's board. And if you don't mind, I'll just throw all 3 at you right now. Starting off with the Coyotes on the money line at plus 150 against these LA Kings. We talked about the Kings in our other episode, in the Pacific Division episode. Again, just very lopsided scores. I talked about the Coyotes being able to, out of nowhere, just really shock people with teams that they face up. We saw them beat a couple of top-tier teams so far this season. They're really good at home as well. Their home record is above 500. So I'm going to take the Coyotes on the money line at plus 150 against these Kings. My second pick, I told you I usually never take the under at 5.5, but I'm taking the under in this Avalanche Predators game, under 5.5 at minus 101 for my second pick. I talked about it. The last 3 games for the Avalanche have gone under the number. The Predators have not been able to score goals. UC Saros has been better. Enough said with that. Taking the under at 5.5. But my lock of the night, I'm taking the Stars on the puck line at minus 118 against these Montreal Canadiens. Again, I'm saying the brunt of the offense is heavily going to be favored on that top line, and I think they get the job done. That's my lock of the night as well.
Thank you very much, sir. This is a tough time to lay wagers. Right ahead of the Christmas break. That's one of the things that I had right here at the top of my notes is be a little wary of what's happening because certain teams and certain players in these situations, this is a look-ahead spot to some family time, some personal time. That could be huge. When I'm looking at the Vancouver Canucks at the Edmonton Oilers, Steele, I have to just do this one time, and I'm going to do it heavy to end the season in a big flip triple dip special. The Edmonton Oilers, in the last time out against this team, put up a 5 spot. 5-3 Edmonton Oilers. That's my first pick is over the number. This just screams over. This might be the most simple one on the board. If I get burned, I get burned. Give me the over 6.5 total. That's where I'm headed. The Edmonton Oilers have looked a lot better. And I know it's through 2 players, but those 2 players are the 2 best in the NHL, fantasy, offense, or otherwise, and I'll stand by that right now. That's how good Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid are. And if you have a problem with that, you know where I'm at on Twitter. Holler at your boy. Edmonton Oilers are going to dust aside the Vancouver Canucks in their last home game before the break here. Canucks are not going to show up. Oilers on the puck line. Now, that's not my lock of the night. You know where I'm going with this one, Steele. McJesus, the great one, the special one. I'm not saying the great one ever, but the great one right now. And when you look at his career numbers against the Vancouver Canucks, you're going to thank me later. In 35 career regular season games, McDavid has the most points against the Canucks out of any other team he's faced in his career. 58 points in 34 games. Give me the over, not 1 point. Give me over 2 points with Connor McDavid. He's going to go off for a multi-goal game. You might not get the best odds as you would other players taking 2 or more points. But with Connor McDavid, you have to pay the juice, and you will get your money. Trust me on this big flip triple dip. I'm betting them singular, and I'm a 1-game parlay them as well. And we're going to finish this season off with a bang and head into the new year proper, Steele.
Absolutely love it. Definitely got to show love to McJesus and what he's capable of. Just to reiterate, my lock of the night are the Stars on the puck line, and Flip's lock of the night is Connor McDavid more than 2 points in the game against the Vancouver Canucks. 2 or more points. He's going to get it done. He loves playing those Canucks. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Don't forget, we are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. So hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. We appreciate all the love and support. Don't forget, we do have an extra episode this Saturday as well. Going to cover either the Atlantic or Metropolitan Division. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. Good luck with all your bets out there. And we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Are you the go-to sports guru around the water cooler? Do you want to be? In just 22 minutes a day, Locked On Sports Today will bring you up to speed with the biggest stories, breaking news, and recaps of last night's action across the sports world with Locked On's local experts. It's the daily sports podcast to make you the sports conversation starter at the water cooler. Stay in the know every day with Locked On Sports Today. Available on Odyssey, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts.